Welcome to Tale Grove, where every story grows roots, and every lesson touches the heart. Every village has a story it tells in whispers, the kind people laugh about during celebrations but never question too deeply. In Umara village, that story always returned to the same place. The cooking pots. Whenever there was a wedding, the air would thicken with the smell of firewood and spices. Smoke curled lazily into the sky as giant pots bubbled, their lids rattling like drums announcing abundance. Guests would arrive dressed in their finest wrappers and igbatas, rubbing their palms together in anticipation. And when the food was served, people would moan with pleasure. "This stew is heaven," someone would say, licking their fingers. "Her hands are truly blessed," another would add, nodding with respect. Yet, barely halfway through serving, a strange thing always happened. "Rice is finishing," a server would suddenly shout. "Meat is almost gone," another voice would follow. Plates paused midair. People glanced at one another in confusion. Finishing? How? Everyone could clearly remember the mountains of ingredients brought that morning. Bags of rice stacked like walls, basins of meat heavy enough to bend backs. An old man would lean toward his wife and whisper, "Didn't they say 2 cows were killed for this event?" His wife would shrug, scooping the last spoon of stew. Maybe people are eating too much. But when you looked closely, no one was eating excessively. Children had small portions. Elders ate slowly. Even the greedy ones hadn't gone for seconds yet. Still, the pots grew empty. By the time the last guest arrived, the servers were already shaking their heads apologetically. "Sorry, food has finished." Finished. People laughed it off because laughing was easier than asking questions. After all, the food had been delicious. And the cook? She stood proudly near her pots, her wrapper tied tight, her face calm, almost amused. "Next time we will cook more," she would say confidently. "You know village people, they eat well." The guests nodded, satisfied but puzzled, carrying home full stomachs and half-formed doubts. What no one realized then was that this was not coincidence. It was a pattern, a quiet, repeating mystery hidden beneath praise and peppered stew. And all it took to break it was one person who would later refuse to look away. In Umara village, there was one name that carried weight heavier than a bag of rice and sweeter than honey on a hot afternoon. When people said it, their voices softened with respect. Mama Lizzy. She was not just a cook. She was an institution. From the moment she arrived at an event, everything shifted. Children were sent away from the cooking area. Women adjusted their headscarves. Men nodded in approval. Mama Lizzy moved with the confidence of someone who knew her worth. Her wrapper was always tied firmly around her waist, her blouse spotless despite the smoke, and in her right hand was her wooden spoon, long darkened by years of fire, carried like a royal staff. "Leave that pot," she would say calmly, and hands would withdraw instantly. "Add more salt," someone might ask. She would glance once and reply, "It's enough. Trust me." And they did. If Mama Lizzy was cooking for your wedding, people congratulated you as if you had already succeeded in life. "You are lucky," elders would say. "That woman's food cannot fail." At funerals, her soups brought comfort. At naming ceremonies, her rice was set to bring blessings to the child. Past clients spoke of her like a legend. "I gave her the ingredients and slept peacefully," one man boasted. "By evening, the whole village was praising me." Another woman laughed, fanning herself. "Even if Mama Lizzy cooks stones, they will taste sweet." No one dared to count ingredients when she was present. No one stood too close to her pots. Questioning Mama Lizzy was considered rude, almost sinful, like doubting an elder or correcting a priest during prayers. She had cooked for chiefs, pastors, rich traders, and stubborn in-laws. Her face appeared at every major celebration, standing near the fire, smoke rising behind her like incense. So when food finished early, people blamed everything except her. "The cows must have been small. The rice seller cheated us. Village people eat like locusts." Mama Lizzy only smiled, wiped her hands on her apron, and accepted praise like rain on dry ground. Because in Umara village, trust was her strongest ingredient. And no one, not yet, thought to watch the pot too closely. After a while, it became impossible to ignore, yet everyone ignored it anyway. The pattern followed Mama Lizzy like a shadow. Weddings, funerals, birthdays, harvest celebrations, different compounds, different families, same ending. The morning always began with abundance. Sacks of rice were dragged into courtyards. Basins of meat sat heavy on wooden stools. Chickens squawked, goats bleated, and elders nodded with satisfaction. "Ah, this one is plenty," someone would always say. "Today nobody will complain." By afternoon, smoke rose thick and fragrant. The food tasted just as people expected. Rich, deep, unforgettable. Guests praised it loudly, smacking lips and licking fingers. But then quietly unease crept in. "Please, is there more meat?" a woman would ask a server, holding her plate carefully. The server would glance toward the pots and lower her voice. "Auntie managed this one. It's almost finished." Finished. At funerals, elders frowned as plates came back light. At weddings, young men joked nervously, pretending they weren't still hungry. At children's birthdays, parents divided portions, apologizing on behalf of food that had promised more. People whispered in corners. "I don't understand. 3 goats were slaughtered this morning. Maybe the goats were small. Or maybe people ate before the rest arrived." Each excuse sounded weak, but no one pushed further. Questioning Mama Lizzy felt dangerous, not because she threatened anyone but because she stood too high. Speaking up meant risking shame, gossip, even being labeled ungrateful. Her assistants noticed everything. They carried heavy pots that somehow felt lighter than they should. They counted coolers in the morning and fewer by serving time. They exchanged glances but said nothing. When elders complained quietly, the assistants lowered their eyes and kept serving. Fear wrapped their silence tightly. At night, after events ended, families sat around small lamps, chewing slowly. The food was sweet, someone would say. Yes, another agreed, pausing. But it didn't go round. A brief silence followed. Then someone laughed, forcing it away. "Next time we'll just buy more." And so the pattern survived, fed by politeness, protected by praise, strengthened by the belief that some people were above questioning. But patterns, no matter how quiet, always wait for the wrong moment to repeat themselves. And soon in Umara village that moment would arrive, carried by someone who would not whisper, would not laugh it off, and would not look away. The woman arrived quietly, without the noise or excitement that usually followed big events. She came early in the morning, while the dew still clung to the grass and the village roosters were clearing their throats for the day. Her name was Madame Chioma, and she did not look like someone who wasted words. She stood in Mama Lizzy's compound with her handbag tucked under her arm, her eyes moving slowly, taking in the large pots, the stacked firewood, the coolers lined neatly against the wall. She nodded once, as if confirming something only she could see. "I've heard you're the best," Madame Chioma said calmly. "People say your food never fails." Mama Lizzy smiled, that familiar confident smile that had opened many doors. "Madam, when I cook, people remember the taste for years." Madame Chioma returned the smile, but hers did not reach her eyes. "Good. Then I want you to cook for my mother's 70th birthday. It will be a big gathering." Mama Lizzy's eyes sparkled. A big event meant big ingredients, big pots, big praise. "There is only one thing," Madame Chioma continued, her voice steady. "I will be here throughout the cooking." The smile on Mama Lizzy's face paused just for a second, too quick for most people to notice but long enough to matter. "You don't need to worry yourself, madam," Mama Lizzy said lightly. "I have assistants. I will handle everything." Madame Chioma shook her head. "It's not worry. It's interest. I love cooking. I want to learn from you." The courtyard suddenly felt smaller. The firewood crackled loudly as if listening. Mama Lizzy laughed, forcing ease into her voice. "Cooking is not easy work, madam. There will be smoke, heat." "I don't mind," Madame Chioma interrupted gently. "I'll stand where you stand." Silence stretched between them. Somewhere nearby a goat bleated. A breeze lifted dust from the ground and carried it away. Mama Lizzy nodded slowly. "As you wish." But as Madame Chioma turned to leave, her calm steps unhurry. Mama Lizzy watched her go with a tightening chest. Something had shifted. This was no ordinary client. This woman was not coming to celebrate alone. She was coming to watch. And for the first time in years, Mama Lizzy felt the uncomfortable weight of eyes that would not blink, would not be distracted, and would not look away, eyes that would follow every pot, every spoon, every movement. The fire had been lit, and this time there would be nowhere to hide. The firewood caught with a sharp crack, and soon the familiar rhythm of cooking filled the compound, the chopping of onions, the scrape of knives against wooden boards, the low rumble of pots settling over flames. Normally this was Mama Lizzy's kingdom. Normally she moved freely, commanding space with her voice and her spoon. But not today. Madame Chioma stood close enough that Mama Lizzy could feel her presence even without looking. She wasn't hovering or interfering. She simply watched, calm, attentive, unblinking. Her wrapper was tied neatly, her sleeves rolled up as if she truly meant to work. "So," Madame Chioma said softly, rinsing rice in a wide bowl, "how long do you soak it before cooking?" Mama Lizzy hesitated, then answered, "Just enough to soften it. Too much water spoils the taste." Madame Chioma nodded, remembering. "Ah, that explains the texture people talk about." Normally, this kind of praise would have pleased Mama Lizzy. Today it made her palms damp. The assistants moved carefully, aware of the tension in the air. They chopped vegetables slower than usual, avoiding eye contact. One of them instinctively reached for a cooler, then stopped, unsure, glancing toward Madame Chioma. Mama Lizzy noticed everything, and hated that she did. She looked around for excuses. Someone to send away. An errand. A moment alone. "Blessing," she began. "Go in." "Let me go," Madame Chioma said gently, already standing. "I'll fetch the water. You should focus on the pots." Mama Lizzy's mouth opened, then closed. As the morning stretched on, the heat grew heavier. Smoke clung to clothes. Sweat traced lines down Mama Lizzy's back. Every pot she stirred, Madame Chioma observed. Every lid she lifted. The woman leaned slightly forward, interested. "Is this the point where you usually reduce the fire?" Madame Chioma asked. "Yes," Mama Lizzy replied quickly, adjusting the wood. Her spoon felt heavier than usual in her hand. Time refused to disappear. No gaps. No blind spots. Even the back gate remained quiet. Mama Lizzy's chest tightened. This was wrong. Cooking wasn't supposed to feel like this, measured, watched, slow. She was used to movement, to moments slipping unnoticed. Today every second stayed. And as the pots began to fill, something else became clear. For the first time in a long while, all the food was still there. Every grain. Every piece. And the day was far from over. The long tables were set beneath the shade of tall mango trees, their leaves rustling softly in the afternoon breeze. Plates gleamed in the sunlight, bowls of rice steaming, soups shimmering, and meat arranged generously on platters. Guests began arriving, children skipping along the dusty path, women in bright wrappers chatting and laughing, men adjusting their agbatas as if to announce their presence. Mama Lizzy stood nearby, her wooden spoon tucked under her arm, watching silently. She had prepared countless events like this. Yet today the rhythm felt different. Every pot, every bowl, every scoop she had so carefully measured remained intact. Nothing had vanished. Not a cooler gone missing. Not a single portion mysteriously reduced. The guests began to serve themselves, plates filling generously. Eyes widened. "Is this for me?" "Really?" a young woman asked, staring at the heaping plate of fried rice in front of her. "Yes, take it," the server said, equally surprised. "There's plenty to go around." Elders whispered to one another, eyebrows raised. "I could swear she always ends up giving less," murmured one man. "Look at this. Everyone is getting full portions." Children squealed with delight as their plates were filled to the brim with rice, stew, and chicken. Even the shy ones went for second helpings. The aroma of pepper soup and stewed meat wafted over the crowd, mingling with laughter and the occasional clatter of cutlery. Madame Chioma watched quietly from the side, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She had insisted on staying, observing every move, and now the truth of her suspicions was clear. The food had not shrunk. Every measure, every pot, every ingredient she had counted in the morning had reached the serving area untouched. Mama Lizzy's chest tightened. She smiled politely, accepting compliments, but inside, a silent realization took root. The guests were praising her as usual, but this time their astonishment wasn't just at the taste, it was at the sheer quantity. "Look at this," whispered a woman to her friend. "I can even take some home." And as the guests laughed and ate heartily, Mama Lizzy finally understood that the pattern she had relied on for years, the disappearing portions, the vanished coolers, had been broken. For the first time, the food did not shrink. And someone was watching. Always watching. As the last plates were cleared and the sun dipped toward the horizon, a hush settled over the village compounds where the event had taken place. People lingered under the shade of mango and guava trees, wiping their hands on wrappers, chewing thoughtfully, and exchanging glances that carried more meaning than words. Something felt different, strangely, unmistakably different. An elder, leaning on his walking stick, shook his head in wonder. "I don't understand," he muttered to his neighbor. "The meat, the rice. Even the children had enough to eat. I swear I've never seen it like this at Mama Lizzy's other events." A woman nodded, smoothing her wrapper anxiously. "Remember Chief Okafor's daughter's wedding? The food disappeared halfway. Half of it gone. And yet we praised her hands. We never questioned." "Exactly," said another villager, a trader who had watched the events over the years. "And yet today, there is even leftover rice and stew." Leftovers. Who ever heard of such a thing? Whispers began to ripple across the compound, subtle at first, like leaves stirred by a gentle wind. "She was being watched," someone said softly, almost afraid to speak louder. "The lady, she stayed the whole time." Villagers exchanged knowing glances. Past clients shook their heads, disbelief mixed with a twinge of guilt. They had trusted Mama Lizzy unquestioningly, praised her food, and quietly accepted that portions somehow always shrank. And now it was plain as day. The cook had been watched, and suddenly nothing went missing. Children ran past, laughing, unaware of the adults' growing realization. The smell of the leftover stew lingered, rich and warm in the fading light, carrying with it a quiet accusation. One of the elders leaned toward his neighbor and whispered, "It's true. When someone watches, she cannot take. Not even a piece. The food reaches the people, all of it." From that moment, a subtle change began to spread through the village. Curiosity sharpened, and minds that had long accepted the mysterious shortages now began to question. Stories that had once been told with laughter and admiration started to carry suspicion. Somewhere deep in the crowd, someone muttered almost to themselves, "So that's the pattern. She only takes when no one is looking." And just like that, the village began to notice. Slowly, deliberately, a shift had begun. And for Mama Lizzy, the calm certainty of her reign had just met its first real challenge. The sun had begun its slow descent behind the hills, painting the Umara village in hues of gold and amber. The event was winding down. Guests were leaving with leftovers, laughter and chatter spilling into the air, mixing with the faint scent of roasted meat and simmering stew. Mama Lizzy, usually calm and composed, felt a tight knot in her chest. Something was off, something heavier than the usual praise or murmurs of admiration. Madame Chioma approached quietly, her steps measured, her eyes steady and unblinking. "Mama Lizzy," she said, her voice soft but carrying a weight that made the cook straighten instantly. "May we speak for a moment in private?" Mama Lizzy's stomach flipped. Usually, clients thanked her and left. They never stayed to confront, never lingered with purpose. She nodded, gesturing toward a quiet corner of the courtyard where the shadows of the mango trees stretched long across the ground. They sat, a small distance from the remaining helpers and cooling pots. Mama Lizzy felt the silence press against her like the humid afternoon air. "Madam," Mama Lizzy began carefully, "I hope everything was to your satisfaction?" Madame Chioma smiled faintly, a smile that carried no warmth. "Yes, the food was delicious, exactly as people said it would be. But Mama Lizzy," she paused, letting her gaze linger on the cook's hands, worn from years of stirring and chopping, "I know your pattern. I know how it usually works." Mama Lizzy's eyes widened, a flicker of panic flashing across her face. "Pattern?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual light. "Yes," Madame Chioma said calmly. "The coolers that disappear. The portions that shrink. I heard from my sister-in-law who hired you 2 years ago. She told me how the food never reached the guests fully. I didn't come here to accuse you, Mama Lizzy. I came to see for myself. That is why I stayed." The words hit harder than any anger could have. Mama Lizzy's jaw tightened. She had cooked Thausan. Of meals taken countless portions in secret, and never been challenged. Not like this, not calmly, truthfully, and without shouting. Madame Chioma leaned forward, eyes steady. Today I watched. Every pot, every scoop, every dish reached the table. And you know why? Because someone was watching. You cannot take what people see. And Mama Lizzy, it is time to ask yourself what matters more. The stolen portions or the honor of your hands? The cook swallowed hard, the wooden spoon in her hands feeling suddenly heavy, as if it carried the weight of every meal she had ever prepared and every lie she had woven into the aroma of her cooking. The quiet moral truth settled over her like the cool evening breeze, and she knew. Everything had changed. Somewhere in the village the murmurs continued, but now Mama Lizzy could hear them clearly, and for the first time, they carried a lesson she could not ignore. The sun had set completely, leaving the Umara village bathed in the soft silver glow of the moon. The laughter and chatter from the day's celebration had faded, replaced by the gentle hum of crickets and the occasional bark of a dog in the distance. Mama Lizzy stood at the edge of her compound, her wooden spoon in hand, but it no longer felt like a scepter of power. Instead, it felt heavy, like a reminder of every clever trick she had relied upon for years. Her assistants, Ungatsi and Blessing, were quietly packing the remaining utensils and coolers. Normally, they would chatter in hushed whispers, speculating about which pots had disappeared today and how much would make it home. But tonight, there was a quiet respect in the air, an understanding that something fundamental had shifted. Did you see her? Blessing murmured softly, glancing at Mama Lizzy. Madame Chioma, she didn't shout. She didn't call anyone. She just watched. Mama Lizzy nodded slowly. Yes, she said, voice low, almost to herself, and the truth hit harder than a shouting crowd ever could. The village had begun to notice. Over the next few days, whispers traveled faster than fire across dry grass. Clients who once hired Mama Lizzy without question now lingered in the kitchen, curious, attentive, eyes sharp as hawks. Mothers who had brought their children to her events exchanged knowing glances. Even the elders shook their heads quietly, muttering, "We always praised her hands, but now we see differently." No one called her out publicly. There was no yelling, no accusations, no lawmen marching through the village gates. The justice came silently, like the subtle turn of a river, altering the landscape without making a sound. Mama Lizzy felt it in the way clients measured her every gesture, in the way assistants moved carefully around her, and in the way her reputation no longer carried the untouchable weight it once had. She sat later that evening alone, the moonlight casting long shadow across her pots and coolers. Ungatsi brought her a cup of warm tea, and Blessing placed a small plate of leftover rice beside her. "Mama," Ungatsi said cautiously, "people, they're watching now. You can't be careless like before." Mama Lizzy stared into the cup, the steam swirling like memories of countless events. "I know," she whispered. "No one has shouted. No one has exposed me. But everyone has seen. And sometimes that is punishment enough." The quiet justice settled around the village like the evening mist. Mama Lizzy's hands were still skilled, her food still delicious, but her unchecked power had slipped. From now on, every spoonful, every pot, every meal would be measured under invisible eyes. And she knew that the next time she cooked, nothing would disappear without notice. The village of Umara woke slowly the next morning, sunlight spilling over red dirt roads and the green canopy of trees. Chickens clucked near the compound gates, and the faint scent of early cooking drifted through the air. Yet something in the rhythm of the village felt different. Subtle, almost imperceptible, like a breeze that shifts the leaves without snapping a branch. Mama Lizzy walked through her courtyard, her wrapper tied neatly, her wooden spoon resting lightly in her hand. She moved carefully now, slower, more deliberate. The freedom she once wielded like armor, the freedom to take what she pleased, to rely on empty coolers and invisible transactions, had been replaced with something heavier, awareness. She had tasted the weight of being watched, and it had changed her. Her assistants followed at a distance, respectful but no longer tense. "Mama," Ungatsi said softly, "today's orders are smaller, and everyone is actually checking their portions." Mama Lizzy nodded. "Yes," she murmured, "and that is the right way. No shortcuts. No disappearing coolers." Her eyes traced the pots, the neatly stacked bowls of stew and rice, each measured, each intact. Even the thought of old tricks made her stomach twist uncomfortably now. From the village, whispers traveled slowly like wine through the mango trees. "Did you see?" one neighbor asked another. "She didn't take anything this time. All the food reached the guests. And they were generous portions," the other replied. "It's different. Somehow she's changed, or maybe we've just started to notice. Evil survives only when people look away." Mama Lizzy overheard snippets of these conversations, not with anger, but with a strange, quiet humility. She realized that her skill, her reputation, her very hands, these had been wasted when hidden behind deceit. And now each meal she prepared carried a new weight, a responsibility she could not ignore. As the sun climbed higher, the villagers went about their day, children playing, women carrying water from the well, men tending livestock. But now eyes were sharper, minds more attentive. They had learned the lesson. Ignoring wrongdoing, looking away when something is clearly wrong, allows misdeeds to thrive. And Mama Lizzy, once untouchable, now cooked under the gentle supervision of truth itself. Sitting at her small kitchen table, spoon in hand, she tasted the stew she had made. And for the first time in years she smiled without guilt. The flavors were rich, the portions generous, and she knew that she was no longer feeding just hunger. She was feeding trust, honesty, and respect. And somewhere in the village the wind whispered through the mango trees, carrying a message to every ear that would listen. Darkness cannot endure when someone finally chooses to watch. The lesson lingered, subtle but clear, long after the last plate was emptied.